I get myself into. But I'm really excited because right before coming here, had a call with one of our major funders who is investing at least a fourth of that goal. So do the math. And so that's a really great way to take my. So, but I don't do that without a village. And so let's jump in. So that's me. This is what we're going to cover, fundraising opportunities. What is your role as a board member, which is really key. And then really building relationships that drive support. And then the next step is really asking yourself the question of how will you engage as a fundraiser? I would start off the bat and just say that as a fundraiser, I do not believe that everyone is in a position to make the ask. I'll say that again. Not everyone is in position to make the ask. You can still have a role in fundraising without being the asker. You can be the connector. You can be the person who made the introduction. You could be the cultivator. But you don't have to see yourself as, oh, this is a task and I have to make the ask, right? Sometimes you want that person to make the ask, and it's about relationships and who has the strongest relationship to be able to make that ask versus position, title, or role, just because you are in a role that you need to be the person to make the ask. Sometimes you may not be the right person to make the ask, right? And so again, I just want to say that at the onset. So I want to talk a little bit just about given trends, only because it's important for you to understand where the money is. A lot of times we think that, oh, let's go to corporations and foundations because they have the big dollars and the big, pockets of money. But that's not always the case. So when you're thinking about fundraising and whatever your revenue goals are, it should be aligned with where the money, as they say, where the money resides, where the money resides, right? So I want to start out with that. And I give this to you only just as a reference of where. And so when you look at this, you see that individuals make up 67%. Now, this is data from 21, but the numbers have not changed, and they don't change drastically from year to year. So you'll see that those of you who are in corporations, that number significantly shifted. When I started fundraising, that number was significantly higher. It was nothing to call and ask for a check and then get it. Now, you gotta jump through a few more hoops. And then with fundraising, foundations, that number has kind of gone down a little bit, but in some cases it's gone up as well. What you now have when you look at the individual side of it is you have a lot of wealthy individuals forming these collaborations where they're now doing collective giving and collective impact, right? So that they can make larger and more transformational gifts in communities. And so, but individual still yet is the untapped part, right? So my grandmother used to say, you have not because you ask not, right? And so this is the area that you really should lean into when you think about your fundraising strategies. And then this, if you can see this slide, is really by interest. So you'll see kind of all the segments where people have an interest. You'll see that religion is still in faith. We still give our money to the church. How many of you still give that building fund? And the building had not been erected in 20 years, right? They still got the envelopes in the pews, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about. So this is that, just to kind of show you, just as an illustration. But more importantly, it's important to really understand where, as an organization, you are, right? What becomes realistic when you think about how you approach funders, how you look at your fundraising and your revenue. So this is really just a continuum. I would assume that most of you are somewhere in the mature area. I don't really look at the decline in the right side of it, if you would, mostly because that means you're phasing out the work that you're doing. So you're somewhere in the first half of this continuum. So really understanding where you are as an organization really speaks to how you build your fundraising and your revenue strategy, right? So if you're in the beginning in your idea and your startup, you're looking for those donors who are going to really invest in the work. So it's even more important to have a strong case to the why, because you don't have a history of success yet. And as you mature, you can then begin to give example and success of the programs and the impact. Donors now are really motivated, and they really want to know, like, examples. Give an example. What are the numbers? but also more importantly, to make sure that you're tracking that, because they do want to know impact. They want something that we call a little return on investment. So it's important to really have that. The other reason is really understanding what's motivating donors to give. So there are two different sides, right? So you have the mission driven, and that is just really, hey, it's an exciting idea. They love what you're doing. There's a relationship there. It's ongoing work, mission, and it's an opportunity to really grow your capacity. On the other investment side, that there is a need, right? And so you can identify what that need is. And there's community visibility, a personal incentive, and there's a tax deduction, right? And when you think about foundations, they have to give away and reinvest 5% of their assets every year. So just kind of really understanding the donor and who you are targeting for your giving. So where are these donors? So here are kind of the likely, everybody knows, corporations, foundations, individual donors. I added family foundations there because a lot of families have created foundations to support their giving. Planned giving, just by show of hands, how many of you are in a mature state where you have planned giving and you've received a request from someone who's been a member? How many of you haven't even thought about, okay, one person, two. How many of you haven't even thought about this could be a strategy for what we do, right? People give their money where they've spent their time, where they serve. But again, we have not because we've asked not, right? So we don't ask people to think about, have you included our chapter, our organization in your estate planning? And we're all about that age. I would venture to say we need to do it earlier because unfortunately a lot of us are going way too soon, too fast, right? And so think about your estate planning, your own personal estate planning, to thinking about where you give and leave dollars to invest in. And then also events. Events are my favorite. I think they're the greatest way to engage people in your organization because it is typically the first time someone touches your organization. And so the mistake that many of us do in nonprofits is we will have an annual event. People will come to that event. We capture their information and we do what? We sit on it till it's time to send the invitation again. Big miss. We don't engage them in our newsletters. We don't keep them up to date to what's going on. We don't solicit them for any annual campaign. We don't even say, oh, these 10 VIPs came to our event. Let's figure out a way who has the relationship, who invited them to sit down and talk with them about why it's important for them to support our program. And so it's a really big miss if you don't think about that as an event. How many of you have an annual event? Okay, not as many, okay. How many of you follow up with the people that come to your event? Okay, good, quite a few, okay. The other thing too about events that I always caution people on is to make sure that you're having the right event to target who you want in the room. Right? A lot of times we may do an event and we may have a golf event, which is great. We may have some other, skeet shooting event. I don't skeet shoot because it just reminds me of, who they shooting at. But that's just me because they're typically on somebody's old plantation. I'm just being honest and transparent if I can. I think this is a safe space to do that, right? Okay. So, but my point about events is you have to know when, right, to say that this event is no longer serving our purpose. If your strategy is to raise money around that. For example, I typically say, until your event raises 3 times what it costs you to put on the event, it is a PR event, right? And that's just me. Nobody wrote this formula. I made this up in my head about 20 years ago, and I've been saying it ever since. So, but think about that. The first 3 years, you have to give yourself enough time to build that event, right? You don't want to lose money. If you break even, that's fine. But you want to be able to build the event because part of that is you are building the awareness of who you are and the impact in the community. So it's okay to build it, but if you're 10 years into an event and you're still breaking even, or now you're going into the red, that's a different conversation. And so you have to be realistic. It may not be that events are not what you need to do. It's just not the right strategy. Or it's the wrong event if you're trying to attract the right people in the room. So to think about that as well. So a couple of things I like to share with people in terms of maximizing fundraising. So you want to make sure you think outside of the box and you're tracking the new strategies as employed. You want to make sure that whatever new you're trying, that it is working for what you want it to work for. And you're also just thinking about creative ways for people to give. One of the things that a lot of people don't do, and this is a real easy miss. How many of you have websites where there's a donate button on it? Okay. How many of you have on that donate button, it's a reoccurring option? Okay. Very few. Missed opportunity. How many of you have a subscription to something that you paying for every month and you forget that you paid for it? And you're like, oh, I have Hulu, I have, all these streaming services. My point with this is, on the donate button, if you do not have that option to reoccur, most people do what we just said. You did it, you forget it, and you just automate it, right? So you're missing an opportunity for someone to continuously give to you on an ongoing monthly basis, right? So, I used to run a program called the Posse Foundation, and I would tell the students after they graduated, I need you to give me a $1,000 donation. Ms. Zena, we don't have $1,000. Oh, yes, you did, because I see you social media. If you stop doing this, this, and this, you have $83.33 a month to give back. So what have I just done? Made that giving possible to them where they can see it. They don't have $1,000 in the bank, but they got 100. So you've got to create opportunities for people to give. It's not rocket science. You're just really thinking strategically about how to engage. So you could do a campaign where you ask everyone to give $1,000, right, over a year's time, and depending on the amount of people, you could have reached a significant milestone in terms of your giving in that year. So something to think about as well. You want to make sure that you're showing the impact of the work that you're doing, right? A lot of us are doing great things, but we don't do as good of a job, whether it's social media, a newsletter, or something where we're really telling people the work that we're doing. So we're raising that visibility within a community so that when it's time for someone to give and you go to make that ask, you're like, oh, absolutely, you've been doing amazing things, the young people that you're working with, and whatever your programs are. And then the being flexible and gift opportunities is just what I said, the one example there. Collaboration is really key. Funders, those of you maybe funders here, they love a good partnership. Like, who else are you working with? Who are you partnering with? Because part of that for them is they're maximizing their impact in the community. And so to have partnerships are really key. So think about who you're partnering with and those opportunities to really partner. And then always increase opportunities to engage donors. Invite them to your events, invite them to your programs. You can always go to them also for advice visits, which I think are equally as great in fundraising. And that's where you're going, you have a problem. They have an ability to give you advice or just insight on something. And it's a great way to engage someone without asking them initially for funding, right? So you're sharing kind of a little bit about your work, you're asking them for advice in an area that you have a need, and it's an opportunity to continue to circle back with them, continue to have them engage, and then ultimately ask them to support your organization. So another key thing is really building your case, and this is really kind of what's that 30-second pitch? How are you really talking about your organization in a very succinct way where it doesn't take you an hour to tell people what's the impact, what you do, how you do it, and what's the impact. I like to say, what's the so what of what you do? So if what you do, your organization, the programs that you do, that you are executing, were not in that community or area of focus, what would be the impact if you didn't do it? So what becomes the so what of what you do? So really understand your mission, impact, and the why. but also really knowing your donor base and knowing who you're targeting. A couple of I won't read all of these, but these are just some of the things that you think about when you think about fundraising. So definitely making sure you have compelling needs, you have a strong case, you have a realistic goal. I was meeting with someone before, probably about a year ago, on a youth education program, and they were like, we need to raise $1 million. I'm like, $1 million for what? They couldn't understand why their prospective donor was asking them to really outline, that's a significant investment, right? And so you need to be able to show, like, what will the $1 million support and why, right? Previous fundraising success, making sure that you have effective leadership, a realistic timetable, and you've got to have people who are trained and volunteer support as well. So, and I'm also going to list something here, a full and early commitment for the board. So one of the things that funders are really looking at and really want is, what is your board's commitment? And you always want to be in a position where you say, 100% of my board gives, right? It doesn't matter at what level. I will tell my board, I don't care if you give me $1. The truth of it is I can say with confidence that 100% of my board gives. Now, if you ask me how much are they giving, then that's a whole different conversation, right? But I tell people to give to the capacity that it either is comfortable or it's a stretch for you. But as board members, you can't really go out and ask someone else to invest in your home or your organization if you have not yet written that check. Doesn't matter how much it is, but you want to be able to say that you have 100% commitment. And funders are asking that question. So, teamwork makes the dream work. We've all heard this before. Before I go further. Any questions so far? Working through this? Okay. Oh, cool. All right. So here are some of the solicitation campaigns and strategies. Some of you already have this. How many of you are doing a membership campaign annually? Okay, I'm not sure that that's how it works here, but if you are, how many of you add an opportunity for people to do membership and make a donation? Right? If you already have their attention, why not ask for an additional gift at that time, right? So another opportunity, again, to raise money, not only getting your membership and membership renewal, but you're also asking them at that point to commit into the organization. And then there are the others as well. So the peer-to-peer crowd fundraising, I'll talk a little bit more about that. And I talked about the online. Corporate partnership and matching gifts is another one that people miss. So a lot of times, many corporations will match your individual giving or your volunteer time. And we don't ask for or activate that aspect of it, or even look at individuals and what the companies that they are affiliated with to say, hey, I know you just gave $1,000. Would you consider submitting this for your corporate match? Opportunity to double that impact of that gift. And so, again, just smaller strategies for you to think about how to raise money, in multiple ways. So I'll talk a little bit about peer-to-peer fundraising. These are just a few kind of points around peer-to-peer fundraising. Again, average donation can go up or down depending on what you're asking for. There typically is a sense of urgency, so you're asking someone because, hey, we have a need, we have a campaign, we have this program coming up and it needs your support. An opportunity, again, for you to tell your story with passion. And you could also do some type of video, however you're doing it, to be creative around telling the story. It also makes it easy for people to set up fundraising pages. So a lot of people will do kind of GoFundMe. This gets into a little bit of crowdfunding, but GoFundMe or Facebook page or something, raising money for a birthday and anniversary. So, and then also it makes it easy for someone to just click and share. So those are the things in terms of the peer-to-peer fundraising. And most people, when you ask them to give, will support whatever you have, right? And then the crowd funding. So this accounts for about 1/3 of all donations that come from individuals. Really, again, targeting a specific audience. And the range of gifts in this crowdfunding can really range from $5 to $1,000 and or more. And you want to run it for a shorter period of time. And you could look at some of the demographics of who gives and how people do this and mobile devices. If I could just look at it, click it, do it while I'm doing something else, then it's an easy way to engage donors. So a couple of things around just strategy. So thinking about mitigating the impact. And part of this is really because there's so many more nonprofits now, so many more organizations that are trying to raise money. But again, I go back to telling your story and really having a compelling story to really be sure about kind of what your the status of your organization is, right? To not elevate or amplify that if it's not what it is, particularly when you're talking to a donor, because they will ultimately know. So if you're running in the red and you're barely making it, you don't want to say, oh, it's great, we're good, we just need a couple of more, just to get us through payroll or whatever, the next thing is support the program. So you want to make sure that you really assess the organization and you're really being transparent about your fundraising, your revenues, having a contingency plan, making that compelling need, and also doing your continuous fundraising. And you want to make sure that you're continuously being honest with your stakeholders. Think about the 90-10 rule. So 10% of your donor base is going to get 90% of the lion's share of what you need to raise. So focusing on those top donors, and I'm not saying focus on them totally, but making sure that you have a strategy around the top 10% of who's giving to you in terms of whether you're getting them to renew or to continue to increase their giving. And then the secrets of the pyramid. This has nothing to do with Delta, but it is just the secret of the pyramid. When you think about your gift, and if you've heard of a gift pyramid, you think about if you have, say, for example, a goal to raise $10,000. How are you segmenting that to know how many donors you need at, say, 1,000, how many donors you need to give at 500, how many people you need to give at 100. And so that becomes the gift pyramid to get you to the top of that pyramid. So yes, question. I don't have an example of a pyramid, but I wish there was something I could draw. But if you think about a pyramid and you segment it, there are, and I could send this out so you all would have this, but there are kind of apps and really something quick. You could put in what is the dollar amount that you need to raise, and it will automatically formulate at every level what dollar amount you need. So how many people you need to give at 50. So when you're doing your campaign, you can show like how are you progressing against your goal. But again, the pyramid may say if you have to raise 10,000, you need 5 donors to give you 1,000, and then the rest becomes segmented through smaller amounts. Yeah. I will share that post this. Yeah. Question?
Good morning. My name is Talaya Gray. I'm with the South Florida chapter. Going back to you have like crowdfunding. A couple of my members have come up to me about Be Generous. This organization, or they do nonprofit fundraising. It's like a donate now, pay later. Do you have any thoughts, or have you heard of any like not to do it? Because I don't want to jump into something and then we're in the hole because we have to find that rest of that money that's coming.
Yeah, my first take on that is if you could do it yourself, then why engage a third party in doing it? So that's one. The second part of that is when you engage a third party, you're not getting 100% of that gift, right? Because they are going to take their fees from whatever they raise. And then third, I would just say if you decide to go that route, to really make sure it's the right partnership and that you're getting your money on an ongoing basis and it's not a contingency that you have to raise X amount before they release the funds to you. That's also not a good situation to be in. So that would just be my advice on that, to just really think about using third-party opportunities, because you could really, if you put a little bit of time in it, you could kind of cut them out and get 100% of those donations coming directly to you. Yeah. And I think most donors prefer that, to be able to get their funds direct to an organization versus a third party. Yeah. Thank you for your questions. So, I
Wait,
think it's-
we have a question back here.
oh, I'm sorry, yes.
I don't know if it's case sensitive. That one up there, I will change.
Thanks for your presentation. I'm Melissa Joy with the Chicago chapter. One of the things we're working on, I lead the entrepreneurship side of the chapter, and we have quite a few partnerships
You don't have to.
that are largely in kind. And so my team and I are working through a strategy on how do we graduate and qualify those relationships to understand what's the next level in fundraising and that relationship. What perspective would you provide us if we've got partners that are perhaps in kind or they're sponsoring certain activities? How do we graduate them to the next level, and how do we identify what those next levels are?
Sure, great question. So a couple of things I would think. One, I would say to make sure that you're evaluating any in-kind support. So letting them know that, hey, you know, by giving us this in-kind, you're saving us X amount of dollars. So really showing them their value of how they've supported your organization, whether it's one time or over a period of time, is really important. And then, you know, once you've established that relationship, to say, hey, you know, in addition to your in-kind, because you don't want to say, hey, your in-kind is good, but we don't need that anymore, what we need is cash, is that on top of that, in addition to what you've given us in-kind, we're now as an organization moved to a place where we need to complement that with financial support or a donation. And then ask, you know, what capacity, if you have a tiered giving, if you have giving circles, that gives them kind of some type of benefit or value add for their financial support. So you're building that relationship and building that partnership, but you know, you're making it where it's comfortable for them, right? So small businesses, sometimes they're able to give larger gifts, sometimes they're not, sometimes it could be a combination. But I would say give them options there. But first and foremost, show them the value of what they've already given you, given by that need of why you need kind of them to consider now just adding in that financial support, if that makes sense. Great question. So again, thinking about who are your prospective donors and how are you segmenting them in terms of how you're engaging them, how you're identifying what gift to ask them. A lot of times we also make the mistake of asking for too little or not asking at all. So we're building those relationships, but we're not asking, nor are we're asking people to give, you know, a lesser amount than they may have the capacity. No one's ever been like, you know, like, oh, I can't believe they asked. Like, if I look like I can give you $1 million, I won't be offended if you ask me to make $1 million. I'll just tell you, I'll write the check, they'll go to the bank, right? You might have to wait that delayed investment. But I think that people are really, you know, if you ask them, they will figure out a way to give. And if you have those creative giving options, then it makes it more easier. It makes it easier for them to consider giving to your organization.
What's her name?
So I'll just show this. Many of you probably know this kind of demographics.
She did say.
What's interesting about this is looking at kind of how people give. So, you know, when you're thinking about various demographics, thinking about how they best, you know, give. There are still people who love to get those stamps and free labels, and then they send a check, you know, in the mail. They don't come as often as the direct appeals to come. But thinking about kind of the online, the email appeal, how people really volunteering. So I want to focus a little bit here around volunteers. A lot of us will engage volunteers. They will give us their time. They'll give us their talent. We never ask for their treasure.
Yep.
Right? So that's the piece that we're missing. So if someone's coming to your event year over year, why not ask them to consider, hey, you ever thought about making a gift to the organization? We have this campaign and could really use your support, right? And so we never ask them for their time. So we have all these volunteers who their time is great, but we've not converted them to donors. So thinking about that as well. Okay. The millennials, the Gen Zs, and then there's, you know, the new group that's up now. Here, I know they're all, we all over the place, right? So, how many of y'all work with millennials? I love millennials. They have changed the way I lead and the way I probably live my life right now. I got strict boundaries in my millennial life, right? But one of the things that I love about millennials is like they will show up, they will volunteer, they have disposable income, and guess what we don't do? We don't ask them for money, right? And these are the ones too, and the Gen Zs. They want to know like what's the impact now. They're not waiting for you to get results. They want to see their money in action because they're given their time. And so again, I only lift this to show just the strategies of kind of how they give. It's mobile, it's not the online, but just really making sure that you are aligning your strategies and revenues around the various gifts that make up your demographic. So this is where that's important. And then other factors here. So again, just thinking about like how people prefer to give, the role they play. And I'm like, everybody is an opportunity to make an ask, right? We just have to determine when we're gonna make that ask. Again, I go back to some of the common fundraising mistakes is, you're asking for money, but you're not building and keeping friends and relationships. So as you're asking for money, how are you really cultivating those relationships? You're making cold or cool calls. You really don't know the person, but you're still like, I'm gonna ask because they look like they're gonna give, right? So thinking about that, and then too many calls at a low dollar level. So when you're really thinking about doing something big and ambitious or having a campaign, you really have to think about, are we asking people to give and invest at the right level? Because $10 donations is not gonna get you to 10,000. That's a whole lot of $10 ask. And back in the day, we called them chicken dinners and fish. Y'all know the fish fry with spaghetti. That's a Midwest thing. We didn't do that in South Carolina. We just put that yellow mustard on that fish with 2 slices of bread and gave you $10. Y'all know. So, some of y'all like y'all don't know, but I know. And then emergency fundraising. So what I mean by emergency fundraising is like being in a moment where it's Monday and if you don't raise this money by Friday, you're in trouble. Right? Most funders don't really like that because one, you haven't developed a strategy. And if you're in that situation on Friday, guess what happens on Monday? You're back in the same situation. So you want to make sure that you're really thinking as your board, as you're thinking about your program, that you're thinking more long-term, you're thinking contingencies, and you have multiple sources of ways that you're raising money. So not just you doing an event, and some events are great because events can really fuel your programs for an entire year, but also just making sure that you have other ways that you're engaging donors. And then just lack of training, coaching, and support. So even though you may serve on the board, it's important to just have some type of training for your board members, whatever it is. Fundraising can be one of those things, but you're going through a day or 2 days right now of just training that's really fortifying your board. So making sure that you're continuing to do that. Again, just really having a vision, having a strong revenue plan, really make sure that your board recruiting and leadership. So I'm gonna pause on board recruiting for a moment. It's important when you are recruiting for board members that you explicitly say to them, because this is one of your responsibilities as a board member to have your responsibility of the organization, that there is a fundraising commitment. Whatever that commitment is, whether it's a give-get strategy or you want people to outright give a gift. And so the give-get is you either give 1,000 or you help raise 1,000. However you do it, it doesn't matter. So to really be very explicit in that when you're just not, in addition to your time and your talent, we also need your treasures on the board. So I'm on a board and we're bringing someone on the board who has capacity. He's a multimillionaire. And the executive director never had the conversation with him about board giving. I'm like, we absolutely cannot afford to bring anyone on this board if we're not explicit in saying that a part of your role and responsibility is the one to help us raise money, but also to make a personal gift to the extent that you can there. So I think we have to be really direct in that. And also just having a commitment from the CEO. The good thing is the majority of CEOs of people who lead organizations understand fundraising. But there are CEOs out there who will absolutely not go on a fundraising or solicitation trip because they don't believe that that's their wheelhouse. And part of it is that they think that there's something that they need to do or have experience in asking people for money. But again, it's about building those relationships. And then also, you want to continue to build a culture of philanthropy and stewardship. I tell people that it's important for everyone to recognize that they have a role in fundraising. Again, I go back to whether you're building a relationship, you're making that introduction, but everybody has to feel like the fundraising is not on one or two people in the organization or one or two people on your board. Everyone has the capacity to really support the organization's fundraising. Did I get a clap over there? Yes. Oh, okay. Say that one more time. Everybody. So it's really important because I was in a team meeting the other day and I was like, oh yeah, we're finishing this big, ambitious strategic plan and we're somewhere around $100 million. And I'm like, I'm not the only one and the CEO is not the only one who's gonna go out here and raise the money. We can do it, right? But it's important for everybody to understand that they have a role. And as we take this national campaign on the road, you may be leading one program, but we may need you to come and give us feel about what you're doing and the impact that you're having. So everyone needs to feel like they own it so that everyone can celebrate the success at the end of the day, right? So that's really important to do that. So thank you. So the No Ask fundraising, these are what I call friend raiser. These are really kind of building awareness, but even though you want to do events to raise awareness and raise money, it's also equally important to do smaller events where you're educating people about the work. So you can or can't do, an ask at these events, but you're really talking about your programs. You may have some beneficiaries who are impacted by your program here, but you're really just showing people, like, here's what we're doing, and it's a no ask. People will show up to this, especially if you have, thank you, especially if you have an opportunity to have it in someone's home or some other cool venue is really important here. So I'm gonna flip through a little bit because this is important to know your role as a board member while we have time. So I think this point just really illustrates how would you describe your board. So this really goes to having a realistic perspective of how are you functioning as a board, right? Healthiest is when you're in the center. You take responsibility along with the executive director. So the board is not in the staff lane, the staff is not in the board lane. So that's a whole nother session. We won't talk about that here. But this is really important in terms of fundraising, to really know the health and strength of your board. Your role, some of these things I've mentioned before, but it's number one is to advocate for the mission of the organization. I tell board members that when I'm recruiting, particularly for my organization, if someone is on 10 boards, I won't recruit them for my board. Why? Because you're stretched too thin. You don't have the capacity to give me your time, talent, and treasure. More importantly, you don't have time to give me your treasures because now I'm just getting a portion of it. So you want to make sure that your organization is one or two of an organization, right? So that they can really give you your treasures. And then also to serve as a major donor, maintain those relationships and really engage in donor stewardship. It's important, I won't read all of these, but really, the thing here is to really, that I want you to walk away here, is to really track how your board is giving and how are they really impacting in your fundraising overall. And again, I go back to the 3 T's that every board member should know: your time, your talent, and your treasure. And all 3 should exist. Here's a leadership challenge, kind of switching from, you're all in favor of the mission, but who's gonna ask for the money? I like to say this is when people start missing board meetings. My work schedule is really increased, so I'm gonna have to travel a little bit, so I'm not gonna be at the meeting. And I don't know when I'm coming back to the meeting, but send me whatever information I need to read, right? So this is when you start getting people who don't show up when it's time to ask for the money. So my challenge to you is to think about a leadership change. So think about being policy planners and policymakers to really becoming connectors, cultivators and fundraisers? How are you shifting the way that you are increasing your support of the board? How can you really become comfortable and confident with the Donate Me? Do that, which is really a key role of your board. Again, these are your personal kind of things that you do there. And some of the 10 most important duties and responsibilities here as a board. Again, what is your role? How are you going to support your organization? You can put prospect in the middle of that donor, you can put your organization, but how will you engage? Are you going to be the connector, the engager, the cultivator, or the asker in this? And so that wraps up. I usually do this in 2 hours, a longer with more interaction, but you got the gist of what this is. It was my pleasure being here. I think we have time for additional questions. Okay. I think there's 10 minutes for questions. So any other questions? Oh, okay. I'm not sure I understand either, so. Big brother's always listening. Yes.
Each board, there's a different understanding about who's going to raise money for the board and how they're going to show up. So can you talk about a little bit, like, in your experience, what are some of the best practices in terms of engaging all the board members, and where do they start? Do they just start willy-nilly going out, or, start close to home?
Yeah, so a couple of things that I usually like to do. One, first and foremost, you got to start in the recruitment process and setting those expectations. So as much as you're courting someone for your board, you want them to court you, and you want to make what are the expectations clear up front. I've had the best experience doing that. The second is at the top of whatever the fiscal year, we do something called a board commitment. So I want to know how you're going to activate your time, talent, and treasure, right? So what do you have the capacity to give individually, whether it's you, your company, how you're going to raise money for an event, how are you going to show up with volunteers? And so what we do is we project manage, if you would, whatever board member said that they would do, right? So we're coming up for this event. Can we count on your $10,000 that you put in here? Can we count it towards this event, or do you want it to go to general programming? So that's the second thing. And also the third thing that we do, and to put people, I don't want to say put people on the spot. One of the things when I'm doing a board packet of my board meetings is I take the names out. I show what the board giving is. So board giving is accounting for 60% of what we're doing right now. And then there's another little chart that goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I remove names, but I show in-kind support of each. Behind every letter is a board member. So they see how are they doing by comparison to other people. So, people want to show up, and sometimes you just know who's giving. But that visibility in front of the board can really motivate a board to give. So those are my probably top 3 things that I would say. And just manage that expectation and be clear. Yeah. Thank you.
Hey Zena, how are you thinking about succession planning for your board? So are you identifying when people are rolling off? How are you then identifying like who you want to roll on? Right. So in the example that you mentioned about like having that person being on 10 other boards, right? Like I still see value in maybe having that person engaged in some other way. Right. So how do you do that?
Absolutely. So a couple of things that we do. One, we do a really, is not even a sophisticated board matrix, I'm not even gonna pretend. But we put board terms in there. We look at kind of the diversity of the board, where are people coming from, what's missing. And so we succession plan against that. One of the things that I've done in leading the organization is when a board member rolls off, I give them the joint responsibility of helping to identify their replacement. So I need you to help me, and then let's together figure out who that next person is. And it could also happen succession plan in terms of leadership, right? So the person who is on the board, the next leader may not be on the board, but we need to recruit that leader to come in with the expectation that we're bringing them in for their leadership to come on board. So that's how we've done succession planning. The current board that I'm in with Purpose Build, if you know our history, you'll know that we were created by 3 wealthy white men. So for 10 years of the organization, they had no fundraising at all, right? 3 years ago, we've got some generous investments from some really significant donors, and now we're about to embark on a $100 million campaign, right? So how do you go from 3 donors to a few to now these big audacious goals? So I'm not necessarily raising $100,000 gifts, although we'll take them, but most of my donor targets are multi-year $1 million gifts, right? Because that's a long 5 years to get to 100 million, and my goal is to get there in 3. Other questions? Okay, last one. Okay, it's been my pleasure. Thank you again.
Thank you, Zeta Houston. We want to say thank you again, clap hands. So we're going to quickly transition into lunch. We have a spread out on the area for you all. And quickly grab your food and come back. We have Mikkel Slater here from Comcast, SVP of HR, up next.